Well, good morning and welcome to our podcast, our very first one for ACS Women in Leadership. And this morning I'm joined by Sherilyn Gostelow, who is the CEO and Principal of Calvary Christian College, by Karen Spiller, OAM, who is Chair of ISQ and Principal of John Paul College, and Ros Curtis, who's Principal at St Margaret's Anglican Girls' School and Queensland Chair of HESA. So thank you for taking the time at such a busy time of year, ladies, to come and join me and have a conversation around trust in leadership. So just to give us a little bit of a context, the 2019 CSIRO Australian National Outlook identified trust in governments, businesses, non-government organisations and the media as being one of the key things that had declined and a key focus for us moving forward as a key challenge for us to really consider and focus on. Combined with that, earlier this year, David Brooks, who is an op-ed writer for the New York Times, wrote about trust in his article and talked about trust and how we can develop trust. So we're probably familiar with Dr. Paul Browning's research around why trust the head. He did a thesis on it, and we've all heard and read about what Paul believes are key elements in developing trust. Together with that, in my research a couple of years ago, when we looked at, my research looked at key challenges and key things that came out for governing boards in recruiting principals. Interestingly enough, trust was one of the key elements that governing boards really importantly had to develop within their school communities. So hence the conversation this morning around trust and what does that look like for leaders? What does that look like in our schools? What does that look like for aspiring women and in some of our school communities where women leaders are probably not common? How do we develop our profile, our credibility, and build that trust in our organisations? So, Sherilyn, do you want to pass on a start and have a comment?
I think for me, over the years, there's been this notion of the old metaphor of the bank account of trust, that you can make withdrawals as long as you're making deposits. But more recently, I've come across a newer metaphor relating to the balloon. One poor incident and the balloon is pricked and you have to start all over again. So you can lose trust very quickly. Rebuilding it is one encounter at a time. And I think it's really important that we walk our talk, and communication is key. The hardest part of it is when you find yourself in a situation where you think you're communicating clearly, but you're not, or the other person is not hearing or perceiving what you think your message is saying. And then also there are times when unwittingly you find yourself in a position where you can't actually engage in a conversation because you don't even know that it's required. That's been the hardest part for me.
I think it's very wise when you talk about, or at least, refer to relationships, and I take from that also visibility and being around and about for people. A very wise bishop I once knew in a school I was working talked about the very essence of pastoral care, being pastoral before you needed to be pastoral, and walking around and making connections with people so they understand who you are rather than the role that you occupy. And that kind of holds with me today. I think one of the great challenges that we can find, though, is that as we move through the leadership chain and responsibility. There are times when we are called upon to make tough decisions in our schools or in our organisations, and some people might take that as a breach of trust or a breach of faith because they may not be seeing what we see as leaders, and they may not see the imperatives that we have in our own organisations to make some strategic decisions. So I think initially my comment would be the pastoral relationships, the visibility, and your point is well made too about communication and always communicating the strategic vision and the strategic purpose of the organisation.
Several things come to mind, Lynn, when you first started talking about trust. Number one is, I think the principal in a school is the one who has to trust the most. They trust the teachers to get on with the job, they trust the board to govern correctly, they trust the parents to support the value of the school, and so they have to trust a tremendous amount to be effective as principals. But also when you talk about trust, what comes to mind immediately as well is integrity. And so leading with integrity, I think, is really important. And what does that look like? I think it looks like all the things that you spoke about, Sherilyn, and you too, Karen, the idea of relationship and building relationship. And Sherilyn, you mentioned, I think, about walking the talk, but I also think it's really important to talk the walk. So as you are doing things, you are very transparent about why they need to happen and how they're going to happen. So communication obviously is the key to strong relationships. But if a principal sticks to the values of the school that they're leading and in everything that they do, those values are demonstrated, then I think they're leading with integrity, and from that comes trust.
So important in terms of building relationships. That's one of the other key things that certainly came out in my research, and one of the things that Paul Browning talks about and other researchers. So as a principal, in that first time you've never been a principal before, you're stepping into the role, Paul talks about and says trust is endowed on principals who do what they say they will do. Well, that's fine, but what happens when you get a situation where you say you're going to do something and then, because of circumstances outside of your control as a principal, you're not able to do that? You're not in a position. Either your governing board has said, no, that's not going to happen, or there's been other things that have happened that have just said, no, it's not going to be workable. So how do you then still maintain trust and credibility after you've said, well, we're going to do this and move forward? Ros, do you want to comment?
Well, I just think you tell the truth. It's about transparency. You just have to say that you intended for something to happen this way, or you thought this would be the way to go, but more information came to light. This was the information. And I find that most people are reasonable and rational, and they understand. I also find, if I go to the other side, there are some people who will never trust you. It doesn't matter how much you build a relationship, how much you demonstrate a commitment to trust and to integrity. People just sometimes are very wary of others in leadership. And partly it's because it looks like a secret business. So if you can demystify that secret business and take people on the journey, I think that's really important. I've been in many a staff meeting where I'm, sometimes delivering bad news or not quite good news, and people are nodding. They're going, "Oh no, we understand that. That makes sense." Mm-hmm. And I think we should be able to, if we're going to trust our teachers to get on, for instance, with the teaching and learning program and everything, I think we can trust them with when things don't quite happen the way they should.
I absolutely concur with what you've just said there, Ros. I think of a very pertinent and recent example at John Paul College through the COVID pandemic. We have a very large Ellicott centre, and up to 90 international students would enter and be in that particular Ellicott centre and then migrate into the main college of John Paul College. And so John Paul International College is really a very significant part of our business. And when the pandemic first first hit back in 2020, we talked a lot of language and a lot of conversations with all of our staff across JPIC and JPC about keeping the family together, and we truly had that commitment. And the board made some very wise and very culturally significant decisions to wear some significant losses, certainly through the 2020 year, because we wanted to keep the family together. We truly expected that borders would open and we would have a fresh intake of international students through 2021, and as the new year dawned and as term one came upon us and still no hope, we had to make the tough decision to make some of our JPIC staff redundant. And so going and talking to them and saying, this is a very significant change in our anticipation of how we were going to deal with this pandemic, but this is why we need to make this change, blah, blah, blah. And again, taking people on the journey, obviously pointing to the very facts of the matter that we were, 100, 150 international students down. We did need to make some significant changes. So most people will understand, as you said, Ros, and certainly in our case, the community and our staff were very understanding and very appreciative of the openness with which we commenced that whole process. So you're right, it's really about relationships, communication, getting in front of people as often as you can, and telling the truth. Nothing beats it, really.
At Calvary, you speak of a redundancy process. In 2019, we faced a similar situation, but for very different reasons. And you're right. Keeping the transparency, keeping the narrative very clear, being honest and open does go a long way to helping. What is difficult, though, is there will always be the few who find that journey so painful. And then there's a lingering, I could call it lingering grief more than anything else. And it hurts in a community, and I found that very challenging over the last 2 years because we came out of this into COVID, and it's not easy, particularly when there's confidentiality clauses around some of what you're dealing with, and you can't, for want of better words, give a defence. I think the way, for me, the way I walk through that is I'm really, I guess, standing on the foundation of the trust that I've built over the time prior to stepping into a situation that is complex and difficult. I'm very mindful, though, that you speak of a family at Calvary, so do we, and I think every school feels that way. I think that when there's grief in a family, it is difficult, and that can be something that lingers, and I find that really hard to work with. It's a day-by-day visibility, showing how much and how deeply I care, letting the staff and the community see something of my vulnerability, but certainly not the cracking up. It's more about, this is painful for me as well as it is for you. And I think it's just a daily journey more than anything else.
I think being real and communicating is so important. I think back to one of our principals in our network who had never been a principal before, and he was appointed, the first day he walked into a community where, due to circumstances beyond his control and the previous principal, there was just so much fear in the community. And he did exactly what you shared with us. He was real, he talked about himself, he talked about why he had accepted the role, he just was real and honest and upfront with his community. And he said that went so far into building that initial trust as the new kid on the block, so to speak. In David Brooks's article that he talks about, he gives some tips about building trust. And one of the things that I would be very interested in hearing your comment on is he says to give away power. Now, when I read that, I just thought, well, as a principal, how can you give away power? So would you ladies like to comment? Are there ways you can do that without giving away your responsibility, the accountability that you have by your governing board as principal? Sherilyn?
Sure. This is very close to my heart. part of why I agreed to take on the principalship at Calvary was that the board was interested in a distributive leadership model. And I think it parallels for me something of what we're trying to do in teaching and learning when we talk about giving agency to students. So we talk about with our students, student voice and choice, but adult wisdom in the balance. And I think it's the same kind of thing in the context of working with staff. And so for me, I'm very clear that the buck stops with me, that ultimately I bear the responsibility. And that's why it's important that the message of what matters most and how we operate has to cascade very clearly right down the college. And that's what's enabled us to hand over power, because it is power, so that there are situations where teachers have opportunity to work to their strengths. Yes, there are tasks that still need to be done regardless, but it means that people have a chance to design something of the special added extra, if you like, that they bring to their role. So who you are and what you bring to the table matters to me, and no two teachers are the same. So I see you because I spend time working out who you are, you matter to me, and you have opportunity to forge something special in the way that you live out your daily duties and responsibilities. That for me has been key. Not always smooth, because there are moments where you have to have the conversation around, well, that wasn't quite what I was expecting, so can we talk about that, and can we affirm what has been good, but the even better if? So for us, those are ongoing conversations, and I think it's a long journey. You can't turn a culture that's essentially hierarchical overnight, and I think education has for decades been built on hierarchies of responsibility. So we encourage people, solve the problem at your level, do it creatively, and do it in accordance with the values and the mission and vision of the college. Sounds simple, not so easy in practice, but every day we're committed to moving forward in this.
I think learning to empower others is one of the greatest challenges that early career leaders have to face, and that we all continue to face throughout our career as leaders. I'm constantly having conversations with our aspirational mid-career and senior staff about having to empower others, and taking it on as something that gives you great joy and delight as you see others grow in their professional wisdom. Because it is so much easier, we know, just to do the job well, because you know you can do it well, and that you can get it done, you can tick off all the boxes, and then you can report up to whomever you report, and you can report to the people whom you manage, and you can get everything sorted out, tickety-boo, and you can be confident it is well done. Having said that, of course, nobody really grows out of that, except you feel a great sense of wisdom and entitlement and success. And of course, the people with whom you work are feeling disenfranchised and disempowered. So managing the empowerment of others and encouraging the empowerment of others. I read a book a number of years ago that was called Power and Empowerment, and it was one of the most profound, I guess, epiphany moments where you actually realise that one of your greatest powers as a leader is to empower others, and of course to work out ways in which you manage them so the deliverables are delivered on time and everything is achieved the way it would be, but along the way you are growing other people.
The whole notion of power, I think, is often an uncomfortable one, particularly for women. I like to use the words authority and influence, and I think one of the ways you can empower others, as we call it, is by influencing them to do a project or to take responsibility for something or to do more of what they're doing. But an important part of that influence, of course, is communication and conversation. And so monitoring, which isn't a very popular word, but really the role of the principal is to monitor that those that we've empowered or influenced in order to go down a certain way are actually still on track. And the way to see that is to monitor it. The best way to monitor it is to have a conversation. So it's about this communication all the time. So I think that's really, really vital. And when you're communicating, and I might be saying to someone, and I just had an example of this the other day. I started off to somebody I've just appointed as a service learning coordinator to say, look, I've got a vision. Let me tell you a few stories. I'll tell you the vision. Tell me how you feel about it and how you'd like to take it from here and what you might want to do. And so I told a few stories. I described a few things. I explained why I was wanting something to happen a certain way, but I'm thinking this might be the way to go, but you might think of a better way to go. You know, it's that sort of conversation that you have all the time. At the end of that conversation, the person said, right, I know what I'm going to do, explained where she was going to start, sounded great. We've agreed to a check-in, sounded great. You know, and so, but she's feeling empowered because she's got the framework. So hopefully, as she does the work in this service learning area, we've got a group of students who are part of a philanthropy group, and that was really key in this area. I'm thinking that it's all going to stay pretty much on track. But it's influence, and storytelling is a really, really powerful piece, I think, for leaders. It's important for trust, it's important when you empower people. It's irresponsible to ask somebody to do something or to take an initiative forward but not give them any framework in which to operate.
Thank you. I'm hearing some key words in this conversation that we're having this morning. I'm hearing communication, relationship, sharing stories, influence, as all part of building trust in our leadership journey. Trust and influence and empowerment. So if we move on from that, one of the tips that Paul Browning, our colleague, suggests in building trust is to be visible in the organisation. Now, for a beginning leader who moves into a new leadership position, if you were to say be visible in the organisation, what does that look like for them? Does that just mean wandering around the school and being seen, yes, I'm here? Or what does that look like for you on a daily basis? Particularly for you, Karen and Roz, you're both so busy with and so committed, and Sherilyn, with you being involved in the Uniting Church, an organisation. So what does that look like? Roz?
Look, I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about visibility. Sometimes it's really hard to get out from behind the desk or away from the meetings where you're out of the school representing the school, but your own staff don't necessarily see you. But I think having pretty much an open door policy when I'm there is really important. That's visibility. It's not me getting out, but it's invitational. It's allowing people to come in. I also have a couple of little strategies up my sleeve for visibility. One of them is to make certain I stand in the coffee queue in the morning with the kids and with the staff and have a chat. I know other people do bus duty or they do other things like that as part of their visibility. But I do think the key is your leadership team. Your leadership team assists you with your visibility, because when they're having conversations, they're saying to people, that's a great idea, let me take it back to Roz, or I've been speaking to Roz. And so it's a different type of visibility, but people actually remain aware of the influence and the authority, and it's your team that's helping you in that. I think that's a really important part of visibility as well.
I think we can talk about physical visibility and let's talk about social visibility. Like Roz, I've got a couple of strategies. I've got to tell you, for ever and a day, 23 years of principalship, I've had walk written in my school calendar literally on a daily basis, and the number of times I go on that walk is, you could probably count them on your two hands. But really making sure that I'm out at the beginning of the day, and if I can, at the end of the day, just welcoming students into the school. Depending on where it is, it might be at the primary front gates. That way, multitudes of parents who, of course, walk their children into school get to see me, so that's an added benefit, see staff on duty in the secondary school within the campus in major areas, and you get to develop student name or get to know student names, and they see you and teachers see you. So I've actually found that the most useful way of being visible outside attending co-curricular activities. So of course, you know, being at the dance, debating of cheer, the netball, the football, the whatever it is, that is just so incredibly important. But I also mentioned social visibility. When I moved to John Paul College, it was after 18 years as a head in another school, and quite a different school. And for a variety of reasons, I think there was a degree of suspicion about why I was at the school and maybe my affinity with the school and so on. So I started being a bit of a novice on the whole social media area, but started to put the occasional tweets or comments up in Facebook with, you know, here I am at the event, really looking forward to seeing our students doing whatever it was. And doing that often enough and randomly enough, so whether it was on a Saturday afternoon or a Friday night or a Tuesday evening, whenever it was, people could see that I was at these events and that I was expressing support for students. And so I think that social visibility is also incredibly important. But nothing replaces being out and about, talking to parents, talking to staff, talking to students, of course.
I think you're absolutely right. The walkabout is very significant, and yes, it's in my calendar, and yes, I do it. More because I like to stretch my legs, and I find too, often there are matters that I have to deal with in my office that may weigh me down a little, and when I get out there among the students, it's a lovely reminder of why we do what we do. So I look forward to those parts of my day. One of the things that I decided to commit to when I started as a principal, and that was only 3 years ago, was people by day, paper by night. And I don't always get that totally right, but at least the heart of that encourages me to give time to people. As a natural-born introvert, there are elements of the job, the walking and talking, the kind of networking conversations, the chit-chat, I find quite difficult. But the more I do it, the better I get at it, and I find it doesn't deplete my energy quite as it did in the beginning. I've been quite open with my community about that aspect of my personality, and they get it, and that's okay. The coffee queue in the morning, excellent space to be. But one of the things that I did is literally took a sledgehammer to a wall, and we put a door into my office. So one of the walls is pretty much a double open French door. It's open most of the day, and students walk past, and sometimes they just wave. Sometimes they drop in, staff drop in, parents drop in. You might think that's very time-consuming, but I have found it invaluable. And community knows I'm quite big and ugly enough to say, you know what, that sounds like something we should talk about, let's make a time. And they get that as the signal of, this is not the moment, would you go away, I have something else I need to do right now. So that kind of openness, I think, comes back to building the trust and the relationships. And Lynn gave me a very good tip right in the beginning about just making a couple of phone calls every week. And that's helped me enormously. The telephone is not my natural space either. I'm getting better at that. And I think community appreciates the effort we make effort, maybe that's the wrong word, but the priority we give to being visible in whatever way we can, going to events, being visible on social media. I think that helps enormously. And I think it helps people to understand that we are, after all, in a people business and people matter.
Yeah, Sharon, you've reminded me of one of the things I did when I was principal that I'd forgotten about, but not just the random phone calls, but if I'd had a difficult parent or a staff interview, shows my prep teacher background, I would head over to the sandpit in the prep and early learning centre, and I would literally take my shoes off and sit in the sandpit with the children. And often, when I was over there would be parent helpers. There would be who would just come and chat to me, and other people would walk past and see, there's Mrs. Donnelly in the sandpit again. And that was one way of building visibility. I mean, I did a few other things like the coffee queue and the playground duty, being on the in the car park, but it's interesting that the sandpit one is one that staff who are still at Genesis now, when I was there, remember. It's interesting what people remember after you leave schools. That was one thing that they actually still remember. So you've all talked this morning about working with your leadership team. I'm wondering, maybe I might start with you, Karen. How do you build trust with your leadership team? What does that look like? What are some of the things you've done?
I think key is making sure they know that you've got their back. So as a team, we all encounter challenges from time to time, and we all encounter those mum and dad moments where different staff members will come for different reasons to different people, and as long as a team, you have that frequent communication so that you all know that you're all on the same page and that we're all signed up for the particular strategic vision. And then I'm always the one who would say, I will always trust you until you let me down, or I will always believe you until I experience a time when that belief is challenged, I guess. And so it has been said by a number of members of my team that they very much value that no matter what the instance, I will always support them both publicly and privately. And even if we disagree about the determination or the decision that they have made, I would never denigrate them in public or disagree with them in public or overturn that decision in public. We would have a conversation about why I might have a different view and then work a way to land on that view unless they can convince me otherwise. So I guess always making sure that your team know that you've always got their back, because that's what you want to have them for you as well. As Ros said, you want your team talking positively up about everything that you're doing, and I always say the job of my team is to make me look good, and they've got a lot of work to do in that space.
Ros?
I think, yes, the leadership team is incredibly important, and I have to say my weekly leadership team meeting is one of my favourite times in the week. We have good fun together. We're not always serious, but we're purposeful, and we do get a lot done. But the key to a successful team is reliability, that each member can rely on each other. So we put up with all our quirks and foibles. We talk about them quite openly. We have robust conversations at leadership team meetings as we thrash out issues or directions. And then we have an agreed, we make a decision. And then we're all on board. The other thing is the leadership team not only works to make me look good, but also to make each other look good. And that is really important. There's no playing off of mum against dad sort of idea, in the family dynamic, that everybody's in it together. And so that's why it's reliability. I did a really interesting exercise once, I thought it was interesting, with my team, where I got some balls of all different shapes and sizes from the PE department, and we stood out in a circle and we just started throwing the balls at each other, and you had to catch every ball that came your way, whether it was a bigger ball, like a volleyball, or whether it was just a little tennis ball or even a smaller ball. You had to catch them, and it was a bit of an illustration of how the whole team falls apart as soon as somebody starts dropping the balls. And so it really is very important that everybody's on it, and if somebody needs support because they're overwhelmed, we're prepared to all step in. And although in a team it's important to have lines of demarcation, at the same time it should not be protected territory, and that some people can dip into it and out of it, and as long as the communication is strong, as long as everybody knows no one's undermining anyone, they're just trying to be helpful, or it's important that they have this information because of what they're doing, then the team goes well. It takes a while to build that sort of culture, but I'm certainly reaping the benefits of all that time and effort. The other thing is, if you are a brand new principal and you've inherited your leadership team, keep building the type of culture that you want, and over time people do come and go. It is amazing that things do change within teams, and each new member meet with them regularly. So my leadership team, I meet with each of them separately every fortnight. But if you're brand new to the team, I meet you weekly. And that's the way I can tell the stories and I suppose really build the culture of the leadership team.
It's interesting to me how similar our strategies are, but then, of course, we're reading and schooled in the same thinking around leadership and team building, as it should be, which gives me great comfort and hope for the future of education. I think, for me, what's been really important is my leadership team and I kind of stood on a burning platform, let's say, and that meant that the team had to find their cohesiveness pretty quickly. That helped enormously. But even having said that, there was still a lot of work to do for me to win each of them personally. And it's gone beyond the fortnightly conversations and so on. It's been very much, I know I was watched very carefully. Am I true to what I say I am? My demeanour is watched. I don't mean that to sound like judgment. It was more a scrutiny. Can we really, really trust you? Yes, they trusted my competence. Yes, they'd walked a few yards with me in the short time that I was a deputy at the school. But I think the sense of, was I trustworthy once I held the power? I think for them, that took a little time. One of the things that helped us enormously was we built a team profile, if you like, from personality profiles. We trialled quite a number and settled on the Myers-Briggs one in the end, which helped us understand a little more how our team makes decisions. What is our balance of introversion to extroversion? What's our balance to intuitive and gut decisions opposed to those who want the whole plan settled ahead of time? I think knowing those things about each other has helped us a great deal. And what I love about my team most is that they spend so much time making sure that I succeed. They will make me very aware of anything they think I need to know. They will also make sure that I'm in spaces. We talked about visibility. If I haven't been to a chapel or an assembly for a week or two or three, as it happens, they will come and say, we think you need to come and speak at assembly. So they prompt me. It's like they watch the things that might fall in the busyness of the everyday and all the other challenges we face. And I just appreciate that team in such a deep way.
Thank you. I love your comments around the leadership team and how it's so important for them to make you look good because you are the face of the college, but also for you to sow seeds into the leadership team as well. We're coming towards the end of our time together, so I'm just thinking as we're looking towards next year in 2022, I know one of our schools has, for next year, is a member of ISQ, and they are going to have a lady in as principal who hasn't been a deputy. She's been a head of department before, but the governing board feel that she's definitely the right person. And there will be other women in leadership who are going to be stepping into that new leadership space. So just finally, if you could each share, what would be your top tips as you move into that space at the beginning of the year? First half of the year, what would you do as a new leader in a new role?
I would say have confidence in your appointment and confidence in your calling, but without arrogance, and watch, observe, just learn. Don't say terribly much, apart from your vision, obviously. When I say don't say terribly much, don't judge. Just watch and learn.
I would say get to know your community, and that includes your students, your staff, your parent community, and the only way to do that is to seek every opportunity to get out there and be involved. And one of the most important things I think I did when I first started as principal was I sent around that I'd love to meet every member of the teaching staff. That was in the first instance, and I gave them 5 questions I was going to ask them. I did that, so I was transparent and they weren't worried about the meeting, and they knew what I was going to ask them, and I didn't waver from it. And I found out about them, what they liked, how long they'd been there, what they had been doing. And that was really important. And then I met with the support staff, each of them, and in morning teas. I put on morning teas, and we did small groups so I could speak to everybody and get to know them as well. So that took a lot of time and effort, but I'm really, really pleased I did it, because I do know, I've got quite a large school, I've got a large staff, and I can call everybody by name, and I know where they fit, and I know what they do. And I just, it's really, I think, invaluable.
By way of wrapping up, I'll offer 2 thoughts. One would be to research and become familiar with the impostor syndrome. As you might imagine, the impostor syndrome is where you have that little voice sitting on your shoulder that says, "Ha ha, you're an absolute fool. Do you think that you actually know how to do this job? Everyone will know that you're a failure and that you will fail," etc., etc. And as you can see from the response around the table, we all have felt that, and I'm sure on days we continue to feel it. It took me something like 15 years before I looked at my business card that said Karen Spiller Principal and didn't laugh, because I knew that it was a joke, and I was the only person who could actually read the business card and see that I was a principal. So definitely look that up and know, particularly as women, I'm sure all leaders feel that imposter syndrome from time to time, but it is particularly prevalent amongst women and early career leaders. So look that up and kind of bat yourself around a little bit. You're going to have to kind of knock this little person on your shoulder away and really kind of suck it up from time to time and fake it till you make it. And on that particular thought, there's a writer, Catherine Colbert, 2Ks, who writes out of Barnard College at the University of Columbia, and she writes about there are 4 taboos for women leaders: money, power, ambition and failure. And I thoroughly recommend that you read her work, because she does address that those 4 taboos can plague us all, whether you're an early career women leader or whether you're experienced, as we all are around the table here. So all the very best for your leadership journey.
Thank you, Karen. That was a great summation. And thank you so much. This has been such a lovely time together, just talking about trust in leadership, and hoping that this is going to be a way to support and to help our women moving into that leadership journey. So Sherilyn Gostelow, CEO and Principal of Calvary Christian College, Karen Spiller, ISQ Board Chair and Principal of John Paul College, and Ros Curtis, Principal of St Margaret's Anglican Girls' School and Queensland Chair of AHISA. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, and we hope that you have really enjoyed the time and the conversation just around trust in leadership and how we develop that. Thank you and good morning.